We're going to get started on our third and final debate of the evening. This is for Volusia County Council District 3. To my left is challenger Nancy Epps, former mayor of Ponce Inlet. To my right is first term incumbent Joshua Wagner.
Thank you for having me.
Mrs. Epps, you've got 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Okay, I'm Nancy Epps. I have lived in Volusia County for 47 years, which is actually longer than my opponent has been alive. So I have quite a history here. I've done all of my higher education here except my master's in business administration, which I earned online. So I actually just still live in Florida while I was earning it, even though it was from Colorado. I have a history of working in healthcare. That's my only career that I've ever worked in. I have been a laboratory director and a laboratory manager, so about half of my career I have been in management, which I believe is a good example of my leadership skills. As far as my governmental experience, I am the past mayor of the town of Ponce Inlet, and while I was there, we accomplished a lot of good, as was mentioned earlier by Mr. Hood. We solved some drainage problems, which had been extensive. We even had to tear down a house and do a little retention pond there because that's how serious it was. But those issues have now been resolved. When I left office, we had no litigation against the town. Everybody was doing fine. So the history of the town recently does not have any reflection on my service to the town. I have a very long and extensive history of service also in I guess you could say the private sector. I'm a president of Ponce Inlet Lions, I'm a president of Ponce Inlet Animal Welfare, and God bless his soul, we just lost one of our co-founders. I am a past president of the Daytona Beach Elks, and I belong to so many service organizations you almost have to look at my website to really have, I don't have time to enumerate them. I am a member of 2 county boards, and while I was mayor, I was able to get a lot of regional history in, a lot of experience working in regional matters.
Thank you very much. Councilman Wagner.
Thank you. Well, I grew up here. Actually, one of the people that I sit in the very same seat was my administrator, Bob Pullman, when I went to high school in Spruce Creek. Played t-ball right behind here. I grew up. Actually, those trees right behind here that are all big, I actually planted one of them as a child. There's Bob right there. But it's, don't tell any stories, Bob. No one listen, no one call him. But no, I grew up here. My family's been here 100 years. Although some say I'm a little younger, I have an older appetite in this community. My great-great-great-grandfather was city manager of Daytona Beach in 1929. And I actually have some old papers and a lot of things he had gone through during that recession time period. I actually have an article that's pretty interesting from 1931 that talks about he was the most hated man in Daytona Beach, but one day would be respected. Reason being, they give an example, he would literally turn off every other street light in Daytona Beach because times are hard. Those types of initiatives, things like that, we're turning off the lights, but nowadays, really we're trying to find efficiencies and do things. And as these questions go on, when I ran in my record, when people think, oh, Josh Wagner, what has he done over the last 4 years? And the main thing for people at Port Orange and in this area that pay into the general fund, well, I've saved them $74 million. That's a big deal to those people that are, that are paying their bill. If you have let's say $145,000 house, $150,000 house, it's $100 reduction. And when you hear people say your tax bill is the second highest in the state of Florida, that's not what I'm a part of. What I've done is reduce taxes and reduce the burden on families because times are difficult. And it's been my job, and I was elected 4 years ago, and that's what I heard. People said, I want you to focus on reducing government. And that's what I've done. So I have that track record. Obviously, there's other things that I've done as well, but that's one of the most to be proud of.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Epps.
Ms. Epps.
Ms. Epps, I'm sorry. In the last election, you barely lost, what, less than 1 percentage point?
Less than 0.2%.
What do you need to do in the next 2 weeks or less? But thankfully, the time is running down. To knock him out of the box?
Well, I have been out there doing my job as I always do for the last 4 years. Even though I was not in office, as I mentioned, I've been very active in service. And I'm a member of 2 county boards. A lot of board work that I do has gotten me in touch with the community. And I listen. I do talk and I find out what the needs are. And what I'm hearing more is that economic development is at the top of most people's list now. I do believe that I understand the tax bill that you get in the mail is not a reflection of the county's operating budget, but I believe that all those entities that are on that bill could be funded better if we had more a stronger tax base,
But I guess
which
what
economic development.
We'll get into that later, but what I'm trying to get at now is, what do you need to do in the next 2 weeks in terms of your campaign?
Keep talking, keep communicating with the citizens.
Do you think
about
that'll make a
what-
difference?
Absolutely.
Councilman Wagner, your opponent is very aggressive, and she lost by less than a percentage point. I know she's out there, as are you. She seems to be more of the non-traditional banging on doors, where you're more at the forums, and I guess because of your schedule and things. What are you going to do that's in the next 2 weeks to really hit home with the voters?
Well, I'll take a bet on how many doors have been knocked. The over-under, I'd be pretty confident in that. But as far as the close election in the last one, you know, it's tough to, you know, some people don't remember back, but 3 days before an election, when you send out a mailer, this is the county chair of Volusia County has endorsed me, when he hasn't, and your opponent can't respond to that mailer, and ethics charges were filed, people are going to think if the county chair is endorsing you, you're doing something right. When the mayor of the city, Tony Gowdy, when he was on a mailer saying, hey, I endorse this person, and she sent it, which Ponce Inlet, when these things, and he was a city commissioner, when these things happen, they make a race closer. So you have to look at, you know, we need fairness, we need to make sure things are done right. So it was a close race, but that being said, some things were done that I personally at the time I didn't appreciate. But people should recognize that these things did happen. As far as being places and doing things, you know, people that have been paying attention for the last 4 years know I'm very involved, very involved. I'm engaged. I'm not the type of person that got elected and just sat there and did nothing. But going into economic development, which I think it is very important.
Well, let's hold off on that. We'll get to that. I just wanted to get the flavor of the last 2 weeks. But what about those? What about his? What he's saying about ethics charges?
The one about the Frank Bruno mailer was, I did respond to the ethics, it was actually the Elections Commission on that, and I was found to not have intended to have done it. That was an accident of my campaign.
Okay.
Actually, somebody works for Mr. Wagner now. And the other one I did have in writing, but I did not have a signature, so that was kind of a, by the book it was not proper, but as far as what I actually had in my hand, I believe that I had his endorsement. So
I had his written endorsement with his signature, just
after I had one, and I did not know you had it.
Well, this one I don't think will rise to the level of Bruno Hugo last night with Jerry Springer atmosphere, but...
Well, I appreciate you letting me set the record straight, though. It
No,
was cleared
yeah.
by no probable cause.
Let me ask you this, candidate Epps. It's pretty much a given that in the traditional media, the incumbent gets the headlines and the challenge is kind of lost in the shadows. Has that been your situation in this election?
No, I think I've actually gotten very fair treatment from the press. Now, certainly during his years in office, he's gotten more press than I have for obvious reasons, but I think in the last 6 months that the press has recognized that I'm very involved in the community, and I've met with, of course, the editorial boards and so forth and so on. So you've probably seen my name in the press a little more often recently.
Councilman Wagner, is it difficult, or is it more of an advantage being the incumbent and having the press pretty much at your meetings, county council or community events? Does that give you the edge?
It depends how you look at it. I mean, at any given time, you have a group that's going to be upset with an action, and a group that may be happy with an action. So depending on the day or the week, it really just depends. I mean, some people may not like the decision you make, and it may be a deal breaker for them. It may be one of those decisions they say, well, never supported that person. Well, if you come out of nowhere, you know, and actually Ms. Epps isn't coming out of nowhere. She has a record as well from Ponce Inlet. People will hold that against you, or they'll use it and say, like for me, the majority of things I hear are people are happy and they appreciate the things I've done. They may not agree with everything. That's okay and that's normal. But at the end of the day, you want a representative that is out there, that is talking. You notice I'm in the paper a lot, very, very often, and there's a reason for that. I'm very outspoken. I let everyone know where I stand. And sometimes, you know, after a meeting, I take them, I listen to everyone, and I have changed my mind. If people say, hey, this, you haven't thought of this, I've been there. But I believe people have a right to know where you stand on all issues, everything. If you're asked a question, you shouldn't say, I don't know. And, you know, these are different times. We expect more from our public officials, and I think they have that right to know, and I think that's what puts me in the paper, is because when I get the call from the media, as you know, I'm quick, I'm immediate. I always answer the phone and I get back to them because I'm not afraid to take a stand.
Well, Ms. Epps, you are also very readily available when I called on you as a candidate in this race. But It seems to me, from my perspective, that Mr. Wagner is very much visible in the newspaper and on radio and that kind of thing. But for the most part, a lot of the county council members, it seems like they're in the background, and county manager, Mr. Deneen, or the spokesman, Dave Byron, they're in the paper like virtually every day. What would you do to change that? Would you be more visible? Would you be more of a face to the community? I asked that in a previous debate. What would be your perspective on that?
Well, I would do what I've always done, which is I do have a lot of ideas. I bring them forward. I do have a somewhat different approach than I think some of the council members do now, as far as I do like to focus more on the private sector, as far as getting things done and not just making a plan. So, you know, I have accomplished a lot by doing things along those lines. So that would be my goal, is just I would want to present my ideas, and then if the press felt that that was worth covering, then obviously that would be their decision. But I'm not a wallflower, as you can probably tell.
Right. And I like the way this is going in this third debate. It's more fluid, and I'd like to try to keep it that way if we don't have to be too archaic with the clock. Councilman Wagner, it's kind of a tough, tight line to walk, a tightrope to walk between you speaking out individually and the county council having to guard, let's say, legal issues and that kind of thing with a manager. Is that an excuse that a lot of elected officials hide behind, or is there some veracity to that?
No, there's some stuff. I mean, we're policymakers, so if it deals with a policy issue, I absolutely believe the council member in that district. I mean, the county charter, it dictates that the county chair is the spokesperson. I mean, that is the head. So, you know, in a position where you're doing a proclamation or the media is coming in, the chair is the one that really should take that role. But if you're asked an individual question about a district or your opinion on a certain matter, then I do believe you should state it. Now, that being said, I learned early on that you should always say, in my opinion, or because you can sometimes, people will think you reflect the ideal or what the belief of the council, and you have to make sure you clarify it. Like, you know, there's some issues with the beach. Obviously, a couple council members and I have some very significant ideologies, just philosophically. And I can't say as a council, you know, we want to do these things, but as an individual, I make sure to say them. But I'm always clear in who I represent. You know, and sometimes it's just 100,000 people that I represent.
Let's try to move to a pretty quickly through some significant issues with the time that we have left. I know people want to get home in time for the last presidential debate and be done with that, the one on foreign policy. Here on domestic policy in Volusia County, let's start with the beach. The county council voted, and Mr. Wagner was part of that vote, the measure of roll down your window, turn on your lights, no phone, no texting while driving.
Right.
Is that window dressing? Excuse the pun, but is that window dressing, or is that a serious measure in terms of dealing with issues on beach driving?
I think that it's a start, let's put it that way. Right now, the biggest complaint I hear is that I think they've only bought 2 of those smaller vehicles, and we still have a lot of the big trucks on there. I realize there's an expense involved in downsizing, so that may be the answer. I haven't actually taken the time to look into that yet, but you know, there has to be a start, and I guess that's a start.
And let me ask you about those trucks. This is only a recent phenomenon about these. Do we need better drivers? Do they need to take some driving courses?
Well,
defensive driving? I mean,
it's hard to answer this question even in this short amount of time because there's a lot of different areas we could discuss. But as far as the specific vehicles and what we're doing, you know, I have a difficult time with the beach. I think there's council members that don't actually go to the beach and don't quite understand it as well. We've serialized it. I think
and
that's
is
an
it
issue.
still that east-west? You know, the west wants St. John's River and the parks. The east wants the beach. Is there still that sort of?
I believe so. You know, I do respect their position. I just don't agree with it. You know, it's one of those things. It's how they view the beach. I think when I remember it growing up here, you know, late 70s, early 80s, it was more of a park. It was more of a natural. Exactly. It was a natural feeling. You went to the beach and it made you feel good. It wasn't a, you know, like I said, it wasn't a sterile experience. You feel like you go there and everything is covered. And part of it is because we're a beach driving incidental take permit. But there are things we can do. You know, as far as the texting, I think that was probably a good idea based on the amount of kids running through. I mean, that we have to be careful on. The lights was actually a suggestion from a elementary school, and I actually think it was a decent one. I've actually left the lights on and my car battery died, so
Yeah.
those things do happen.
Some cars have the lights that come on automatically, the newer cars. But I've always felt like if you had your lights on, it's kind of like a deer in the headlights. I mean, I would think that would make a child stop rather than
It is,
go.
if you do actually look, I had a difficult time with these changes, I won't lie to you, because once again, I think we've sterilized it, it's more regulations and
And we need to be
schools, it's
clear
just-
that there were 2 children that died, 2 toddlers, I believe 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
One in New Smyrna, one in Daytona. There was no texting involved. It wasn't an issue about lights, it wasn't an issue about your rules, noisy.
It wasn't a liability.
What was the main issue in those 2
It's
cases?
the kids ran in front of traffic. I mean, you notice on the west side
Yeah,
of
it's the same
Volusia,
thing.
Right.
I mean, it's an issue, but that being said, why not be cautious, but at the same time, you know, we're in a point in time where everybody has this little thing that you can do anything in your life on. I mean, you turn your radio station, you're listening to music, so you're looking down at it. And I think it is, you know, we're at a time, and I think the state's going to look at it when you drive in your vehicle as well.
Isn't
We
it-
actually discussed it at the last county council meeting.
Is it kind of ironic that the county's pushing an app that you can
Yeah.
do on your phone by
At
turning
the
on
beach.
text
It's a beach
time?
app, yeah.
Anyway, moving on, the council did discuss, I was at the meeting last week where they talked about expanding the county roads, and then there was an issue about what to do with cities and, you know, as far as uniform enforcement. Do you think that that's a priority for this county council, texting, or there are more serious issues than that? Or do you think I'm undervaluing that type of thing?
I think it's a state issue, I really do. I mean, I agree with the sheriff, who is also very much anti-texting while you're driving. It's not a good idea. It does definitely take away from your attention span.
Josh, quickly, is it a priority issue?
Well, it is, but I need to make sure it's clear that it's not just a state issue. I'm a lawyer, and I
Right.
understand the law, obviously, and roads that we control in certain areas and park systems, we actually have that authority. So,
Because you have that.
as a county council member, we are the ones that will make the laws. Now, granted, on state roads, there are, you know, obviously there's unified traffic control, so, you know, they need to make sure that they are consistent. But in our areas, we can limit that.
Take the cars off the beach, leave the cars on the beach.
I will never vote to take cars off the beach.
Nancy?
I'm not in favor of that either.